All right, welcome everyone to this week's presentation from the DBA Fundamentals Group. This time, this is not your daddy's backup routine with Armando Lacerda. Today is June 18th, 2024. Thank goodness. On the top right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the three names of the leaders of the DBA Fundamentals Group: Steve Cantrell, Shane O'Neill, and myself, Kevin Wilkie. And to the right of our names is the one of the easiest ways to get a hold of us on Twitter, or X as you call it now. We call it now. I'm not that old. Below that is some of the ways you can get a hold of us and see the latest and greatest materials we have out there. First one up being Meetup, where most of you, if not all of you, got access to our group in today's presentations. We have a whole host of them coming up. They just haven't been put out there. And also you can see all of their past meetups as well. We have lots of things going on. It's all part of our big group from Microsoft Azure. Has lots of things going on. So be sure to reach out into lots of different Azure groups and other fun groups as well to see what all is out there. Below that is our website, dbafund.com, where you see all of our coming up presentations as well as our past presentations, or links to them. Below that is our YouTube site, dbafundtube.com. Be sure to like and subscribe to any of our past presentations so you'll know the minute that things come out there like today's presentation. With that, below that is our X handle, DBA Fund, as well as our Slack channels and LinkedIn groups where there's all kinds of comments and talks going on, people helping each other out. Some of our upcoming conferences that are going to be huge. On the right-hand side, if you're in Europe or plan to be in Europe in September, you can always go to the European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference, the 24th through the 27th of September. And then coming up here in the States in November is the Past Data Community Summit 2024. Going to be big as always, November 4th through the 8th. Have lots of goodness with that. And be sure to pay attention to our emails that come out. We should have another amount off coming on that pretty soon, at least the past 2024. I don't think I'll get anything on the European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. Please remember to turn off your video and mute yourself. I'll be doing the same in just a minute. Please be sure to type any questions you have into the chat. And between me and Armando, will his background, and I'm sure Armando even has a better one than that, and he'll talk about himself. So with that, Armando, all over to you.
Hello, thank you, Kevin, and thank you for having me again with this awesome group. I've been a member of this group for as long as I can remember being a member of virtual groups out there. Can you hear me well? Can you see me well?
Yes, we see you really well.
Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and share my video feed here. And let's do this from here. Now I'm supposed to be really big on your screen, and my slide deck will show behind me here. Is it working?
Yes. I see you and the presentation.
There we go. I have a friend, he mocks me here like, oh, you like to be the weatherman DBA. Pointing to things on the screen and all of that. In any case, thank you again for having me with the group. I have benefited from this group so many times in the past, learning new tricks and with awesome lineup of speakers you guys always have. And it's a privilege to be here, and I hope I can share some new information, share some things for my friends that are connected online, and then we'll watch the recording later. Now, I have to start this particular presentation with a warning, right? Warning. Every time I present this topic, I got some people a little bit traumatized about what the things we're going to see. The very first time I presented this section, this actually the same slide deck background, I decided to keep it. It was back in 2016 on my very first SQL Saturday presentation up in Chicago. And the room was full, and there was almost a fist fight in the room. Fast forwarding to SQL Saturday Orange County, when I also presented this particular session here, there was some commotion there as well. One of the guys there was like, this is not really a backup, and he almost left the room. And the other guy was a friend of mine. He was like, Armando, he told me later, yes, Armando, I did not sleep well the night. So what we're going to what we are going to deal with here may be sensitive to some people, right? Because it tackles into a topic that is very, very important, which is the backup process and the reliability of the backup process, right? And I'm trying to make it a little lighter by calling it, it's not your daddy's backup routine like it used to be. Full disclosure, my dad was not even close to a computer when he was still on this side of eternity. He was a dentist. He was working in a completely different profession. So he never took a backup of anything. But just trying to make it a little lighter. For the folks that are looking and are following along, this is my AKA. I have a friend at Microsoft that created this AKA.ms for me there to get to my LinkedIn profile. So if you want to keep the conversation going after the presentation, you can go ahead and connect with me there on LinkedIn. The QR code points to the same place, to the same LinkedIn profile. Some people like to do email, so if you want to email me, mvp.ms it also works. But most people don't do emails anymore, right? We usually do social media, and LinkedIn is my preferred social media. I'm a Microsoft MVP, which means I'm being awarded with this title with Microsoft, which give us a lot of perks. It's super cool. And Microsoft gives this title to professionals like you, like us, when we decided to do what I'm doing here right now, which is sharing my knowledge on technology, and in particular Microsoft tech and services in Azure, and contribute to the group and go participating in forums and all of those things. If you do this, you may get noticed, and if nominated, you can get that same award. So I highly recommend you to get involved, sign up like I did to presenting here in groups like this, and it can happen. And I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. I've been training Microsoft curriculum, official curriculum, for almost 30 years. I don't want to date myself, but almost 30 years. So let's jump straight into the topic, right? What are the basics and goals of backup? Let's try to get into the same page here. Let's see if if I am in the same page that you guys are. And usually I present this thing on, live on like a SQL Saturday session breakouts. Here you guys are all on mute. So if you have questions as I move along, you can go ahead and write your questions and bring them up. I'm gonna have a Q&A at the end of the session. So please feel free to write down your questions, and we can discuss your questions as we move along. I mean, at the end of the presentation. So first, one of the basic goals of backup is to recover from a catastrophic event. So what would be a catastrophic event? It's usually something that will bring down my physical infrastructure. Like here, I'm in California right now, I live here in the Northern California. We have earthquakes every day, right? But some of them are super big, super strong. And if they come to damage a data center over here, we want to be able to stand up our systems, and another data center somewhere else, after we collect all the hardware, we can bring our data back, because our goal here is on the data, right? The backup and restore, it's more about the data. So I want this. This is one of the things I want to recover from ground up. Right, the catastrophic event is my hardware also got compromised, and I may need to restore from there. Sometimes we need a restore of the database for less dramatic reasons, like it's just a developer that needs a copy of the database and need to restore that copy over there. I'm not considered that one, right? It's a use of a backup and restore procedure that is to support developers, which is pretty valid, but it's not really what we're looking for here, right? We're looking for keeping the system alive and restore the business, the line of business applications with the database. And when we plan for this, we want to restore the database up to a point in time. Like another catastrophic event that can happen is an invalid or a malicious process happened to the database that corrupted the database. So I want to restore my database to the point in time before that action, right? Before the database got corrupted. So these two things here are valid for backup strategy, and they address, they're around what we are going to see together. When we do this, we have to design, right? We have to, try to predict the design, the time to recover, how long it's going to take to recover my system, and how much data I'm going to lose from the point of failure to the point of restore, right? Of the system being back up. Meaning, if I take a backup every 6 hours, I have a recovery point in time that may lose 6 hours, up to 6 hours of data because I'm doing a backup every 6 hours. So I need to, assess how much data I can potentially lose if a catastrophic event happens and I have to restore from scratch. I hope we are good up to this point in here, right? We are all agree with these elements and how the concepts that are in there. Now, the point in here is I have these three lines when we're talking about backups, but we have to consider those things after the addition of high availability. Because in the past, and for even today, for many of us, when we talk about high availability, we put these two things apart, right? Backup is something, and high availability is something else. While backup is to restore from catastrophic events, high availability is to keep the system running and avoid it from breaking down, right? Avoid from stop being responsive. So we apply techniques about not having a single point of failure. All of those things in terms of redundancy and data and replication of data, have data going through two or more channels. So we have the system up and running as much as possible. So these two concepts, they were, for the most part, kept apart. And in most people's minds, they are still apart. Backup is something, high availability is something else. And it's fine, right? We can all live like that. It's great until we get too much data to work with. And that is a field that I live and breathe almost every day, right? Most of my clients, they have dozens, sometimes hundreds of terabytes of data. And when you have that much data, backing up that data can be a struggle. It can be really challenging. Why is that? For the most part, for the time it takes to take the backup. Like if I have over 100 terabytes of data on a regular setting, right, on a regular SQL Server setting, how many hours would that take? And then there'll be strategies. We're going to have some slides here that will address that. But the bottom line is it usually takes a lot of time and effort. While when we do high availability, some of the elements we have for the backup are there. Like I don't want to have downtime, and when I do, I don't want to have too much. I don't want to have spend too much time offline. I don't want to have a single point of failure. I want to do switch over, which is recover somewhere else, right? And I want to do a failure detection, which is great because this one here is it reactive? What this can be proactive? And most important, when I do high availability on network level, on storage level, on SQL Server level, I usually do that based on piecemeals, right? On data block replication. And availability groups become a big deal on this one when you want to do high availability groups or bags in SQL Server in between two sites, right? We want to do that at a block level replication and usually asynchronously, not to avoid impacting performance. Most of all, budget is the main one of the main drivers in there. How much it's gonna take to have a system up and running someone else, and how much that's gonna cost to buy the whole thing all over. And if I have to buy something all over for someone else, having them already and leverage them on a day-to-day activity can balance out budget. So there is always this discussion about budget and how much that's gonna cost. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so when you take backups, getting a little closer to the definitions for the backups, usually we see. Oops, I think my audio went off. I think my audio is back on. Microphone went out of battery. Can you still hear me? Thumbs up on Teams just to make sure. If you can still hear me there. All right, thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you. All right, so some of the backup, a little closer to some of the backups premises. A backup is a copy of the data. So backup and high availability, they match here, right? A copy of the data. A backup must be done without affecting production. And again, high availability and backup, they kind of have the same premises in here, right? You want to do high availability without disrupting production. This one is the interesting one, right? You want to do it in a different media. You might be familiar with the 3-2-1 rule for backup, right? You want to have 3 copies of your data on 2 distinct medias and 1 satellite site, right? Somewhere else, right? So the 3-2-1 rule for the backup. Now, the different media it had to do back in the day, back in the daddy's day, back in the day when hard disks were spinning media and they were prone to failure, and they have those heads that could touch the disk and damage the disk. So, but they were super fast. So I want to keep my production running there, but I want to back up in a tape, because the tape doesn't have those problems. It has other problems, but doesn't have those problems. It's slower, so therefore I want 2 medias. Now I have SSDs that they suffer from other problems. They're close to tapes, but they're way faster than tapes. So the different media here, there was a rule in the backup premises, is not in the high availability approach. But again, do I really need different medias there? And also, of course, kept somewhere else, as I just mentioned. So with these premises in mind, we see that backups and high availability, they overlap a bunch, right? They have a lot of points in common. They overlap a bunch. What they don't overlap on some of the elements in there can be discussed and perhaps even overlooked. The point in here is, if my backup strategy is working well with the current strategy and current media, this session may be not really important for me. These new features that came along with SQL Server may not be that important for me. But if I'm working on an environment where my backup is taking too long and it's affecting production, right? It's affecting, my hand disappears sometimes. It's affecting production, and I need to find an alternative way to do faster backups. Then the new approaches that came along like 2 decades ago, 20 years ago, came along 20 years ago, they might be an interesting one. And they came along in other platforms and came in SQL Server as recent as 8 years ago. We're going to give you some of that story there. But like I said, about 20 years ago, you see, I have a Hotmail account. I gave you another email account, my mvp.ms account, but I do have a Hotmail account, and I just did it myself because people like to joke about, how old you are, how long you have been around. Yeah, I'm before the year 2001, right? So I had a Hotmail account from the beginning of the internet. And before Microsoft bought the Hotmail service, I remember I googled it the other day, couldn't find, but I remember there was this catastrophic event that hit some of their servers with tornadoes. Some tornadoes came along and wiped out some of their data centers, and they have lost some availability. Some service, some mailboxes were placed offline, but they didn't lose the entire database because they were already doing a strategy of keeping the data alive based on high availability instead of backups. For one simple reason, their database were too big, and come to the same point of being emphasized since the beginning. When your data is too big, your regular backup strategy may not work. It did not work for them back then, before year 2000. Can't remember the exact name, the exact year. But since then, when Microsoft released SQL Server 7.0, SQL Server back in 2000, SQL Server 7.0, one of the main elements, main features is like, SQL Server 6.5 was okay for some small databases, but it was not really able to deal with large databases. And back then, a large database was like 10 gigabytes, 100 gigabytes. So SQL Server came along, it was like 7.0, it came along, it was like, we can support what today is Google Earth. So before we had Google Earth, there was Terra Server, and you may have heard about it before. So at the Terra Server time, when there were not that many pictures of the globe, the database was about, I think was 3 or 4 terabytes of data. And SQL Server 7.0 was able to work with this, that much data. But backing up that data, that volume of data was a nightmare. So what did Microsoft do? They came up with some strategies. Oh, I'm sorry, that thing's showing up again. They came up with some, I already mentioned this, sorry, the 3-2-1 backup mantra. 3 copies of the data, 2 of them in your backup, and 1 is kept offsite. Yeah. So Microsoft, these are the challenges I have already mentioned. The data size, it's one problem. And the problem gets even more evident. Let me get myself here on the side. When I have a small database over there in blue, and then if the data grows inside, to travel to the tape, the target of the backup, it just takes too long, right? As the data grows, it just takes too long. So I got this little animation here that kind of makes the point why the database size is a problem. So what Microsoft did, and I'm gonna get myself a little smaller here on the corner. What Microsoft did with SQL Server 7.0 with the Terra Server approach that I mentioned is they created these sections inside the database that most DBAs look at this and say, "What? Why is this there? I never used this thing." But you may have heard of, here's my cursor. You may have heard that we have this thing called the file group, right? We know that a SQL database, a logical SQL database, is implemented by a master database and transactional log. That's not on the picture. A master database and transactional log. And if my database grows that big, I may have multiple master database and secondary databases. And I may want to organize these secondary data files, data files, into multiple file groups. For what reason? Why do we have this? Well, multiple data files is definitely for performance, right? You want to have multiple data files so you can spread out your data into multiple disks, physical disks, or multiple looms, right? When you have a remote storage, so you can have parallel threading and avoid physical contention when reading the data from the source. But the file groups, they were pretty much designed to support large database backup strategies. So it's like, I can take a backup of this group of files here. I can take a backup of this group of files here in another day, and a backup of this group of files here in another day. So like in a week, I can do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday, and so far, so on. So if something happens to one of these files, I can, or file groups, I can restore that file or file group by itself, which was going to be faster. Have organized it in a way that it can be very focused on a particular set of data or smaller sets, which would restore faster instead of restoring the entire database, and then apply the logs over there to catch up with the rest of the database. So this thing was designed by Microsoft to support very large databases since SQL Server 7.0's inception. And it works. It's just too cumbersome, right? I don't know if you have done this before. I have done this before, and I have, you know when you have a backup, when you back up and restore, right? You have to do the restore to see if the restore strategy works. So I have done this restore and the piecemeal restore and the file group restore, and it can be cumbersome. And it relies a lot on who is doing this, know the details, because there are a lot of steps involving those details. So this works, but it's not as efficient like how many used to have back then. And so that's when we work on premise. Now, to this point, I have just showed you the current state of things and what are the tools we have to support large databases that take too long to take a backup in SQL Server Platform. From this point on in this presentation, I will start talking about some new features that came along into SQL that very few people that I know have even tried or considered, because most people consider what is coming next anathema. It's like a sin, right? It's not a backup. So bear with me there. In SQL Server 2016, Microsoft was already deep committed to Azure, to cloud computing, right? Microsoft was, someone came on the camera. I hope everything is going okay. So Microsoft was already pushing cloud computing and selling cloud computing. Azure was released in 2010. Azure SQL Database was around since 2010. And now Microsoft is like, we have these on-premise workloads that were pushed up to the cloud. So Azure on VMs in the cloud were a big deal back then. And Microsoft is like, when you bring this database with a very large database like this one here with a lot of data, we do have an option for you in Azure. And the option of that is instead of creating or applying the same strategy of file groups and so on, you could rely on Azure storage strategies to keep the data files and use a backup strategy based on the storage technology. What does that mean? As you can see here in this design, I have a SQL VM, right, running in Azure. And instead of creating virtual disks in that VM, which by far is what people do most commonly out there, instead of creating virtual disks, I set up the SQL database in that VM to keep the data files on blob storages, right here on top of my head, on blob storages. So it's a URL. Instead of create database file on C column, whatever, F column, whatever, it's actually HTTPS and the storage account path and the container and a folder there. Folder is optional because it has to be a flat file system. In case you would create all your files like this. If you want to keep the files split like this, and when it's time to take a backup, you do this this one here. And gotta be careful, right? Pay close attention to the names. This is called file snapshot backup, right? File snapshot backup. So file snapshot backup is a backup option that came with SQL Server 2016. For this particular case, when you have a SQL running on a VM in Azure and your storage is not a virtual disk, your storage is an Azure Storage Account. When you do this, you can do this file snapshot backup. And what it does is instead of doing the regular backup routine that you know, it reads from the disks and then writes somewhere else, it actually makes a blob storage API call requesting the blob storage to snapshot all the files, like with frozen, to freeze the files, all the files that belong to this one here, and creating shadow copies of shadow entries of these files on top of the frozen ones. And any new changes to the pages are made on those shadow files on top of them. So it's a layered file system with the files on top of files with one name for all of them. The outcome of this is you can take a backup of 100 terabytes database in a matter of seconds. And even better, you can restore to a point in time a database like 100 terabytes of the database size in a matter of minutes there, because it's just pointers to files and locations to files depending on, if you hit right where the file is, it can be a second. If you read in the middle of the file, because it has to create the snapshot thing on top of the original files, it can take a little longer, but it's like minutes, like 5 minutes, 7 minutes. They actually have a video about that. I'm going to give you the reference to this one. But this was only for Azure, a SQL Server in the cloud, even running on a VM, but the storage has to be in the cloud. And when people look at this, they're like, this is not a backup because I'm not copying the data anywhere else. It's just a layered file system on top of this. Windows does that. It's called the BSS system, which we'll talking about in the next minute. And it's not much reliable. But the point is, the underlying technology behind these files is the Azure Blob Storage, which by default, at minimum, it will have 9 copies of your data at the block level somewhere in the data centers in the same zone. And if you want to make it cross zone, it will be 9, 3, 12. Will be 12 copies of your data on 2 distinct zones that are at least 100 miles apart from each other. So all of those 3-2-1 rules that are there, well, not a different media. They're all going to be disks, but the copies are just everywhere. And they're already made on the fly as you write data in there. So your backup, your copy of your data is done on the fly, but it's higher availability approach. And that's how Microsoft implements these things for everything they do in the back ends. You rarely see a backup, like using the backup service that exists in Azure on the Microsoft service. They rely heavily on the replication that's way more efficient and less time consuming. This is where my presentation back in Chicago ended. Because when people look at this is not a backup. And I'm looking here into Teams, I don't see anybody disconnecting, so I believe you guys are still there bearing with me. But this is, according to the product documentation, this is a valid approach in terms of backing up database using the shadow system. This is the statement that will do a file snapshot backup. But again, this only works on a VM running in Azure, and the storage is set not to a virtual hard drive, but to a blob storage account. As you can see, that's the URL definition to get the backup there. So it looks like it creates a backup, but if you try this out, you'll see the backup file is minimal. It's just metadata. What happened in SQL Server 2022 is that Microsoft brought this same approach to on-premise. And that was a game changer because as I'm gonna go back one slide. When you look at this, it's SQL Server relying on Azure Blob Storage. If I want to do the same thing on premise, SQL Server has to rely on the storage provider. Like if you are using Dell, AMC, right, Pure Storage, whatever you're using, it has to rely on the storage provider to work together with SQL Server. And that has not been a very good story in the past. Because in the past, what we had, oh, this is the video that I mentioned. If you want to scan that QR code, you see a few terabytes database being restored in 57 seconds. That would take over 30 minutes on the traditional approach. So take a look at that video on Microsoft documentation later. But like as I was saying, in the past, if I want to do something similar to that on-premise, I would have to use the Windows VSS subsystem that supports that that shadowing thing to the hard drive. The problem and the file system on the hard drive. The problem with this is it doesn't work well with SQL. The agent that talks with SQL, I think is my next slide here. So the SQL writer that talks to the VSS system to freeze the hardware, to make the snapshot and bring the thing back up, sometimes they had some hiccups. And if the thing was super well oiled, like well configured, you would create shadow volumes that would be corrupted. If you try to restore from that one, SQL would look for the resulting restore and say, I don't want that. And we'll spill it out, trash it away, flush it away. So this is the old approach, the old style. And again, I'm going to emphasize this. Where's my mouse here? Here, don't try this, right? Don't do this thing. This is a bad idea. I have seen people getting really bad situations because they try to implement this thing in SQL Server. It works fine for regular files, not regulated by or organized by, managed by a database engine. But this one here is bad. But the idea is the same. What came in SQL Server 2022 is this technology here. This way is this technology here. It's the same name, snapshots, but it's called transaction SQL snapshots backup. Whoa, mouthful. So do not confuse transact SQL, T-SQL, snapshot backup. I'm going to go back a couple slides here with file snapshot backup. File snapshot backup is for SQL VMs running SQL Server in Azure with storage in a blob storage. And T-SQL snapshot backup is for SQL servers running on-premise, VM or not, bare metal or not, doesn't matter. SQL server running on-premise connected to storage appliances that are compatible with S3 protocol, the one from AWS. It's funny because Microsoft came along and said, you know what? That AWS, that S3 protocol developed by AWS is way more popular than the blob storage API that we have. So we're going to keep SQL Server running with the blob storage up in Azure, but for on-premise, all the vendors, they're like, we want to implement S3 because S3 it will support not just the API for on-premise network protocol communication to the storage, but also integration with the clouds, with AWS, which is open source. S3 is an open source there, not just the blob storage. So Microsoft gave in and said, okay, we support that. And what happens here on premise, which we'll be demoing in a second, what happens here on premise is it's not a backup on the regular sense of the thing, right? We are relying on storage of doing the replication inside the storage, all the redundancy that we discussed that exists in the cloud. You have to do the same on premise. So, how many copies you're going to have of your data will depend on your settings on your storage appliance. And if you need to have it somewhere else in another site, you have to do the replication to your site yourself. You have to see with your storage how they do that, if they support it. But the point is, if they do, SQL Server will average it. And what will happen is a backup in 2 steps. Let me get a little bigger here so I can point to those ones, because if I do this, my hand goes away, see? So let me go a little bigger here again. Where's my mouse? Here's me bigger again. So it's a backup in 2 steps. The first step is to tell SQL Server to tell SQL Server to stop writing to the data files. So it's a freeze on the data files. And the way SQL Server does that is it creates a lock on the database, on all the objects of the database. And everybody that's trying to write to SQL is put in contention. So transactions stop, they don't fail, right? They may time out, but they don't fail. So they're just in contention. While you do this, after the freeze is put in place, the second step is to talk to the storage appliance through S3 protocol. We say snapshot my files. So the appliance will do this whatever way they do it. So they're gonna do this link there. How long will that take to complete? I'm getting. How long would that take for that to complete? It will depend on the technology. If you look, you can search this. Go into a Pure Storage website, go to their website. They will give you the rates. It's usually on the second side, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 10 seconds. It depends on what you're doing, right? Depends on how it's configured. So research that. So your database will be locked for the time that the storage appliance needs to complete the snapshot. And when it's done, you tell your database that you tell SQL Server that the thing is completed, done, and the SQL Server resumes a regular operation, removing the locks and let everybody write down back to the data files. So it's like a hiccup from the user perspective. Like I'm writing. Oh, spin. Okay, keep going. So from the user perspective, it's kind of a hiccup. And again, I'm gonna demo it now, and it really doesn't fail, but it has this dependency on the storage. So it can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, depending on your perspective. So to wrap it up, this is from the Microsoft official documentation. Let me get into this side here. This is from the Microsoft official documentation. And what this thing is showing us is the process that happens when we do the snapshot backup. Over here, you can see we tell SQL Server, alter database, whatever database we're working with, set suspend for snapshot backup. So this is the freeze. If it works okay, right? And when you do this, it will freeze, bang, frozen. And then I take my backup. If it's if everything works well, I will tell SQL Server that the backup worked just fine, and I will issue this command here, right? Backup database to keep the metadata, and they suggest right different extension for that one to keep the metadata of that backup in place. So you know which SQL Server knows which file to request to the S3 API if you need to restore that database, right? And the restore is done at the appliance side. The appliance makes the backup, the files available in another folder somewhere. And then when you do the restore, say, okay, so the files are there. These are the sync of the file, the LSN for the file, and what I should see in there, or files in the case, and then put the database back online. This operation, again, seconds. If it fails, you just alter it to backup off to tell SQL Server, okay, the backup failed, don't write any metadata, and then some operations in SQL Server for that one, for the unfreeze and everything else. Yeah, the script then is a 3-part script. Mount the snapshot when you are take the transact snapshot, right? If you are doing the restore, you mount on the storage side your files. Files are in place. You tell SQL Server you want to restore the files, and here's a happy path, right, on the yes. My file is restored to a particular place. I want to do a restore of that file, and here's the BKM and the place where my new file is restored to. So that's how we do it. Let's see how that works. Let's go into the demo. And my VM is here, back in place. Let me find my VM here. Here, here's my VM. And here is the documentation, see, transactional SQL snapshot backup. So here's my documentation. I'm going to copy and paste the statements right from here because this thing is so simple. You know, the technology behind it, it's amazing, but the thing is so simple that I'm just going to copy and paste from here. So here is the backup, copy. Let me go back to SQL, SSMS right here. I got an AdventureWorks database going on here. So let me get a query for this database. Here's my database, select. Let me see, I think I may have a table here from previous demonstrations. Let me double check if the table is still there. Nope, not in here. Might be here, let me see. Yeah, I got a table here, my table, in another database. So let's get in here, let's get to AdventureWorks, you. And here on AdventureWorks, I'm going to do a select count star from yes, my table. So here's my table. My table got 8 rows there, fine. And I'm going to get an insert statement for this table. Script table, insert to a new query window. So this is my insert, very simple, just one column, filler, and there is an integer column going on there. So let's put some values to this guy, some string, and off we go. No big deal, think it's working just fine. So now I want to back up my database. So I'm going to go here and paste that backup in there. This is the first step. Suspend, freeze my data files for the backup operation. So I'm going to run this guy here. And user does not have permission. My account doesn't have permission. What do you mean? Oh, sorry. The database name is wrong. This is AdventureWorks 2022. And also that path there for the backup is not okay. Let me see here, temp. I'm going to write here to temp. So I'm going to get this path here and put this path over here for this target. There we go. Over there. So that should work. So this, let's see if that goes now. All right, it's in place. So notice that when it runs, it will say somewhere in here, probably in the next one, it will say somewhere in here that there is no I/O, there is no page being copied anywhere else because it completely relies on the storage. Which means that if I go back here and if I try to do another insert, it will not fail, but it's in a locked state. It's waiting for the resource to be free. At this point, I go out of SQL or I do SQL, SP exec, to go to the system operating system, and I will call whatever tool the storage provider gives to me to force the snapshot backup at their end, at the storage end. If that worked fine, I just come in here and say, you know what? It happened over there. I'm done. Oh, well, sorry. Forgot to change the database name again. See, back in here, see. Copy and paste works like this, right? So this link here is still in lock, right? Is still waiting for the freeze to go up, to go away. So let's try this again, execute. There we go. So notice 0 pages copied by SQL Server. So SQL Server, look, you told me to take a backup. I'll process the backup the way you liked. But this fashion here, I'm not copying data anywhere. You are completely dependent on the storage account, on the storage device, right? On the storage appliance. The bottom line is I created my metadata about this operation, and I know that if you want to restore it later, you have to go to the storage appliance, mount the data, the files somewhere there in the storage appliance. And once it's mounted, you come back in here, as the documentation shows. You come back in here and what is it? So multiple styles supported, right? Backup styles supported. There's the output, file, restore. There you go. You come back in here and you tell me where the backup files were put in place from the storage account. So the data files will be at some particular place in there. And you give me the metadata so I know what to expect when I get into these data files. And the restore to a point in time is also a byproduct of working on the storage end. So it's simple like this. It's 2 commands to backup, 2 steps like I mentioned, the third one with the talking to the appliance, and 1 to restore after the files are made available at the storage appliance. It's that simple, and it's super fast. Like I can do this thing here, no data is copied, so you can see that, right? I have this Stack Overflow database here that's 0.5 terabytes in size. It operates in exactly the same speed. But again, I would need to have a storage placed somewhere else in there. Back to the slide deck. These are the links, and I'm going to send this slide deck later to Kevin so he can share with you guys. These are the links about, this particular one is the page I just browsed with the examples. These are all the links with, Dell, PowerFlex supporting that. This one for Dell again to show the time to rethink your backup. This is another way to say this is not your daddy's backup strategy. Red Hat's Logical Volume Manager also supports that when you are running SQL Server on Linux on top of Red Hat. And this one here is from Pure Storage, also supporting that. And these links are kind of old. I got these links there about 2 years ago, I think. If I go back there, we'll probably have some more documentation on that one. So with that, I'm open up the floor for questions and discussions. And I'm glad we are remote because nobody can throw rocks at me. Kevin, back to you and back to our friends with questions.
It's all good, my friend. I had a few questions, people asking questions about if you can do it on, and if it has to be, so put it right. If your SQL Server is on-prem and your cloud is Amazon, can you still do that?
No.
See, I like questions like that.
So here's the thing. No. Let me expand. I mentioned 2 technologies, right? The file snapshot backup and the transact SQL snapshot backup. The file snapshot backup does not work in AWS. The T-SQL snapshot backup does work in AWS.
That's a good point to bring up. Okay. All right. I hope that answers everyone's question there.
All right. What's next? Chat window, right? If the LDF is still on-prem, is the LDF still on-prem or is it that in the blob storage also? So if you're talking about, that was Steve. Steve, if you're talking about the file snapshot backup, the transaction log is in the blob storage account. And if we're talking about the transact SQL snapshot backup, the transaction log is in the storage appliance. So it's always on the same technology where the data files are. Did you hear that Norma Sebastian, no AWS, at least not yet? Okay, all right, that was just a comment. LDF is on-prem. I'm not sure about that. Ask around, maybe. Okay, so I think I tackled that one. What is that? Learn, database, backup, restore, server, restore with S3 compatible. So that's a link for some page. I'm gonna open it here in my hand to take a look on it later. Sebastian, just a minute ago, in another in another life, I did that within C disks. Freeze, snap, unfreeze. Yeah, if you did with VSS, you are a hero. I hope it worked because I have seen really bad stories with VSS. The next one from Steve, I take it this is for full back. No, you just saw in the documentation, right? All styles of backup: full, differential, transactional, file copy only. It's actually, the backup strategy you have over there on how you're going to retain the transaction log does not interfere in this. Now, if you do retain the transaction log, you can do point-in-time restore. Otherwise, you cannot do point-in-time restore. And that's all. And the other one, okay, gotcha, thanks. Okay, so caught up with chat. All right, Bryce, you're welcome. And Kevin, you want to open the microphone for people to talk, or are we good?
It looks like we're good. Nobody has any questions. If you do have any questions, please type it into the chat or come off mute and talk. We do have a couple more minutes here before Armando goes off to actually dealing with even more clients, just like the rest of us.
This thing is amazing. I love using this. Again, at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned this was targeted to very large databases because you don't spend that much time copying those databases. I present this to a user group, and the guy was like, my database takes 20 minutes, but if it can take 2 seconds, I go for it. And they implemented there, and the guy's happy.
Hey, man, it's a great idea. If it works anywhere near the amount of time that we say here, then I'm all for it in lots of uses if you have enough blob storage space, obviously.
Yep, exactly. Good point.
All right, Steve asks, for AGs, should always be the primary that's snapshotted?
No, it can be either one. Because the snapshot is it's supported by the storage. So if you do the storage, let me think. Yeah, if you do the storage, it's the primary. You're correct. It's the primary. The secondary cannot have the. I gotta check. I'm not sure. Never tried on AG.
And as always, everybody's favorite question: licensing. Woo!
It doesn't change on license because it doesn't depend on AG, on availability groups. It's a standalone feature. I never tried this on a AG setting. Actually, I'm gonna do this right after this session. I'm gonna put an AG there and see how it goes. I'm gonna go check in the documentation. I'm pretty sure it can be from either one because this is the thing that doesn't write anything back to the database. It writes to the storage. And if you do a snapshot from the back, the only hiccup I can see is if you are doing synchronous AG, because the database is frozen on the secondary, it will impact performance on the primary because the primary is not aware of what's happened on the secondary while the database is frozen. That is the only drawback if it's supported.
Yeah, replication could be stopped for a few minutes, and yeah, it depends. So as always, the answer is it depends.
Yep.
But yeah, like you said, for seconds, maybe you could deal with it. If you're not a huge minor transaction company that definitely could deal with and have lots of changes within microseconds, maybe you're okay. But then you have other issues to deal with as well. So,
Yeah.
all right. So with that, I want to remind everyone to come to our next session, which is July 16th. We'll be talking about Snowflake and part 2 of our little presentation on that. Other than that, our next presentation I've actually set out there is for October. Be sure to join us on October 22nd for creating a YAML CI/CD pipeline for Azure SQL database with Torsten Straub.
I love it. That's a good one.
That is always going to be fun. CI/CD is everybody's favorite buzzword at the moment. If you can do it asynchronously, by gollies, go for it. So with that, I do want to thank everyone for coming to our presentation this week, and we will see y'all soon.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Armando.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, y'all.